Here we are.
We're here.
We're here.
I love how we say this twice a show. You know, it's like a thing.
Every time we enter.
Every time we enter.
Well, so you switched Tupac for Biggie behind you.
Yeah, we switched them up seasonally. So Tupac is now upstairs, and the Notorious B.I.G. is downstairs. His birthday's coming up in a couple weeks, and so I figured it's time to switch. I also have an MF Doom painting, so that'll make its way down here at some point.
A what painting?
MF Doom, super underground rapper. You'll see.
Oh, Doom. Okay, I thought you said Dune, like the 80s movie.
Yeah, no. MF Doom, all caps.
I want you to have a Dune painting.
Yeah, I don't have a Dune painting. Yeah, so I'll bring him down here at some point in the spring. It's kind of a dark painting, but it's good.
That's amazing. Good stuff.
Yeah. Well, I'm on yahoo.com here, checking out the old news.
What do they say? I'm always impressed by somebody when they're like, here's my personal email, and it's either Yahoo or Hotmail.
What was your first? My first.
Hotmail.
What was your first? Hotmail? I can't. Oh, no. AOL.
Oh, AOL.
AOL was my first. You've got blah, blah, blah. So I had that garbage and, okay, not garbage, but I had that great innovation of the 90s. Yep. And I think my second was Yahoo, man. I think it was Yahoo. And then Hotmail. And then, like everybody else who sold out, Gmail. Yeah.
Sold out to Google.
I got my Gmail account when Gmail was still invitation only. That's how old school I am. Like, that's old school. Do you remember the first time you went to google.com? Because I do. I remember it.
Do you remember the first time? I don't think I remember. I remember going to it and going, there's nothing on the page, because you're used to Yahoo.
Big blank page, yeah.
Alta Vista, Lycos, Netscape, everything with ads and tons of buttons.
Here's my story. It's fast. I was in college. My friend William Dubell, who is an engineer at Intel and a brilliant deep thinker, and I went to college together, and we would hang out. I mean, it's fucking college. So we would hang out like every night at his house and just goof around until like 3 a.m., go in his pool, hang out, invite some friends over, do the things, right? And so one night, he's very technical, and he had this like huge, he had this Micron computer tower with like SCSI hard drives that he used to show off to us. And he had this like 27-inch Sony Trinitron monitor that, honestly, Andy, I don't think I could fit through my front door. Like, we're talking about like a TV set, like electron tube, whatever, like massive monitor. But we thought it was the coolest thing ever. It was white. I'll never forget. And he's like, Pedro, let me show you something. And he goes on google.com, and it's this massive screen, and it was just a blank page, and it just said Google at the top. I'm like, what is this? And back then it was like, you'll remember, it was like Alta Vista, Excite Search, everything. AOL NetFind, like all of these old school. There was like a Netscape one. Ask Jeeves.
Shout out to Jeeves.
Yeah. Gotta ask Jeeves, man. And so I'm like, what is this? And so he does the search engine, and it's this like clean, all text, like layout. And then he's like, I also have an email address with this company. It's Gmail. And he shows me just the UI, and it was so simple, and the colors just kind of googly. And I was like, oh, I need that. And we looked at the bottom left, and it said, invite your friend. And he had like, I don't know, 2 or 3 invites. And I was like, you sucker, you better send me an invite right now. And so, bam, that's how I got my Gmail account at 2 a.m. at Will's house with a couple of beers.
You can tell me after we end the recording, but I want to know what the first search was for.
Yeah, I'll tell you offline. Anyway, let's talk about Scott.
Well, yeah. Speaking of weird Google searches, our friend Scott. Scott joined us for a fun conversation. He's the chair of cybersecurity and privacy at Manat, which is a firm that he joined like 2 years ago. And he's one of my go-to friends, a lot, like we've had a bunch of our people on before. And more importantly than anything, he's my go-to for, kind of moral compassy type issues. And, when I just need an opinion, he's the guy. I go to him all the time.
Yeah, I'll try to fluster Scott, and it's not going to work. Like I try. He's pretty good, man. He's pretty steady. He doesn't get too high, too low. And I think that's good in outside counsel, man. Especially in your space where you're like, in like the startup. There's like a volatility in a startup, right? Like, and this is like your third one, I guess now, right? And so I can see how a steady hand serves you well.
You need it. It's an absolute necessity. And when I come in and it's so important to have your people.
Yeah.
Because you can't ever do it alone. And,
Yeah.
and in startups, you're often alone for a period of time, until you to get to the point where right now at Alice, I'm really lucky to have Beth and Jamie working on our team. And we're in great shape now, but it can be a grind without people like Scott backstopping you and helping every time something really hard happens. It happens.
I think that's right, and he's at a good firm. I've used his firm before for more like public policy California stuff, but like super great firm, like fair pricing, like always available, responsive, good firm.
Very progressive firm.
Yes,
in a lot of ways, and consulting practice, law firm, like there's a lot of creative thinking in that firm, and so that's an interesting thing, and
which is a shocker,
rare
because
rare. And I think a big reason Scott joined Manat. So here it is.
Let's do it.
Yeah, here we are.
We're here.
Scott has just consented to video recording, biometric collection, any other data collection, and we're going to list his personal home address a little bit later.
He's agreed to let us use his personal data in perpetuity for any purpose.
His dog's
name.
That
is correct. And my social security number.
Yes.
Yeah, got the social jotted down, already applying to a credit card. We're moving.
Yep.
Excellent. Well, we're really pumped to welcome our friend Scott Lashway here. You were leader of the privacy and cybersecurity practice at Manat, a law firm that. So how long have you been there? 2 years?
About 2 years, yeah.
Yeah. And prior to that, Scott was like us. He was an in-house guy at Mass Mutual, and so I think it's a good place to start. Is you were in a couple larger law firms, and then you went in-house. We're always like intrigued by people that make that choice, but then I'm extra intrigued by someone that makes the choice to go back. So will you start there? Tell us what the thought process was kind of at that point.
What, the point of going out to private practice?
Well, no, I start with going to Mass Mutual.
Oh, I was at a law firm. I loved it. Loved the people I work with, but it seemed to me like, being closer to the decision making at companies was appealing, and kind of spreading my wings a little bit was appealing. The job was appealing. The people I was going to be working with was appealing. So it was kind of one of those where it was a little bit of a no-brainer. And it proved to be right. I mean, I had an opportunity to be a lot closer to the decision making. And, I think a lot of outside counsel don't appreciate the amount of lawyering that goes on inside companies. And, I saw it for 5.5 years, 6 years. And so it's very instructive to how I practice today.
What do you mean by that? Can you elaborate on that a little bit? The outside counsel don't appreciate the inside counsel's lawyering necessarily?
Well, I mean, so there are decisions every day that are made inside your companies, right? That generate legal risk or legal opportunities. And, not every time that occurs, folks like yourself pick up the phone and call folks like myself outside the company. I mean, you're one phone call away from dealing with this, that, the other thing. It was interesting. When I first got to the company, we were in an offsite, and the general counsel was, and he cared about this, and now I care about it, this idea of judgment and how important it is to what we do every day. And he picked on me, and I ended up going back and forth with him for a while in front of the law department about how it is important to have judgment, not just on the most important matters, the ones that like get the headlines, but on the everyday mundane decisions that the company makes where legal advice is important. And I think that's where risk materializes, develops, manifests, whatever you want to describe it. And I think that's the in-house counsel's role. In addition to the big material things, making sure those are handled properly. It's the everyday decisions that where the in-house lawyer gets called on, quick hallway conversation when those used to happen. And I think, I enjoyed that, as I'm sure you guys do.
Yeah, it's a big part of the job. And
how do you go back to a law firm? I physically couldn't do it.
Physically.
Like they'd have to drag me in. Who knows?
It's funny. A lot of folks
right now.
Yeah. A lot of folks have asked me that, and I said, I can never go back to the billable hour. And I don't think that's the problem. And for me, I mean, that is what it is. It's how, time gets, or our resources get valued outside a company. For me, I really enjoyed the engine of being outside a company. I was working, 12-hour plus days anyway. I enjoy private practice. It's not, I didn't go in-house to leave private practice. It was just something that I thought would improve me and improve my experience. So my decision-making to go into private practice, into in-house was probably different than a lot of lawyers. So I was excited to come out, and I love being out. I love the folks I work with. And I think that's important. That's the other appeal is, I work with great people, which can be had in private practice.
Yeah, that was one thing that I wanted to point out. We jokingly, called this episode Voltron, right? Where 80s cartoon where a bunch of lion robots form a massive super robot. But, as one of your clients, it's really beneficial to get the value of the team. And you've built a team there. And I think, from our conversations, you've said that that's critical for you. Like that's critical in developing practice is like, you won't see every member of the team on your bill, but they're weighing in. And that's an in-house type hallway conversation type situation that you've tried to bring to the firm. And is that right? Am I thinking about that the right way?
That's right. Yeah. I mean, and it's all folks, it's not just necessarily calling the partner, and saying, hey, have you ever dealt with this issue? It's, asking everyone on the team or anyone on the team to say, hey, I need you to have a second set of eyes on this. And we don't do it because, we want someone else billing. We do it because we want to get the best work product, but it's also fun. I mean, it's a lot more enjoyable to do your work when someone else is kind of alongside. And so, we have the benefit at the firm of truly enjoying one another's company and respecting one another's talents. And our team is, I don't think there are two people on our team, on our privacy and data security team, that overlap 100%. We all have very different sets of experience that we bring to the table, which is purposeful. So it's fun that way.
Is $1,200 an hour, just curious, like at the high end, is $1,200 an hour? Does that make sense? Like, is that for anybody's time, for brain surgeon's time?
For me, I would say you should pay more.
Fair.
I think it's hard. I think it's hard to evaluate because I think there's a lot that goes into that. One, is the person actually charging you for every second they spend working on your work? If they are, then I would say 1,200 is a lot, right? If you're getting nickel and dime for every time you're, calling or reaching out, then I think that's a lot of money. And I think you should, make sure that you're getting the value out of that rate. Personally, we like to tell our clients, so this is a little saying we have, and as people listen or watch to this, to the extent they find it interesting, maybe they'll pick it up. But we like to be the general practitioners to our clients, not just the surgeons. So we want to understand our clients, which takes a lot of energy and a lot of time. And sometimes, you know, clients aren't going to pay $1,200 for us to learn about their business operations, their technology. And they probably shouldn't, but we like to do that. And so we often find ourselves at the beginning of engagements, investing a lot of energy on our dime.
When you and I talked, Scott, when you were thinking about moving from one firm to another, one of the things that you mentioned to me is that they'll let me set my rate at X, right? It wasn't $1,200 an hour, right? They'll let me set
That's
my
right.
rate at X, which is lower than, you know, some rate that somebody might want them to charge. And I think that's, correct me if I'm wrong, right? That ties to what you're saying. Like, it has to be reasonable, and you're working with people on a project basis a lot of times, a litigation or a matter where you're giving
That's right.
quotes. You're not living and dying by that quote, but you're saying, like, this is going to be roughly this, and that's the heads up that in-house team needs.
Yeah, but also we have a team, so you don't just see me working by myself, right? So it's not like, well, I called Scott and he charges X and he's going to do everything from the photocopying all the way to writing, you know, XYZ. You're going to see some balance in how the team functions and some control of costs. At the end of the day, I mean, you know, the other model, if you get away from the hourly bill, is, you know, cost per service or cost per product. And I frankly, I know a lot of clients say they would prefer that, but I'm not sure clients are actually ready to truly tolerate what some of the costs would look like. My own 2 cents.
Yeah.
Do you think the best privacy lawyers are in-house or at firms? They're definitely not in they're definitely not in civil society or in the regulatory space.
Yeah.
Whoa.
I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. The very finest, you know, are the regulators. The top end, top shelf, we can't compete with that level of intellectual veracity. But where are the other good ones?
I think the best ones are probably in-house. I think you see more of it in-house. I think you see deeper into the weeds in-house than a lot of privacy lawyers. You know, if I have to read one more, you know, white paper from somebody telling me what the law says, which is directly contradictory to what the law actually says, you know, that's a problem in this space. I mean, and everyone's talking about, I mean, there's this funny thing in privacy and in security, which is now, and it's really being driven by the lawyers, but there's this whole idea of, like, when did you first start? Because if I started before you, I'm more knowledgeable than you. And then there's a lot of criticism how all these lawyers are flocking to the industry because, you know, it's like the hot thing in the papers, or it's the hot topic right now in law schools. And we're seeing that in our recruiting. And what's funny is I have, you know, you'll be talking to somebody, a competitor or somebody at another law firm, and they'll try to convince me they've been doing this longer than me. And it's always a remarkable conversation to me. I'm not sure length of practice is always determinative of expertise, but I think pure regulatory counseling on privacy, Pedro, I think you're probably going to get better talent in-house. I do. I think you're going to get better experience.
But you alluded to something important, and obviously I was being facetious before. I think there are great lawyers everywhere. But like, yeah. I think one of the benefits of being in-house, and I've been in-house now a long time, is that you get exposed to the operational part in a way that no outside counsel can. Like, I mean, I'm in every operational call. I'm in every compliance meeting. Like, I get to see the machinations, not just the theoretical, like, GDPR says you must do this, and CCPA says create a do not sell button. Well, I get to be in the meeting when the guys are figuring out how to build the do not sell button, where to put it, like how long it's going to take, what the lead time is, what the resource, what the head count required to roll it out on a massive website is, whatever it is. So I think there's a tremendous advantage there if it's just about acquiring knowledge and understanding of how privacy compliance is implemented that is unique to being in-house.
I think that's so dead on. Like, that's so dead on that that really is the differentiator in a lot of ways in the outside counsel that I choose to work with. So it's helpful that for instance, Scott was an in-house lawyer because he was in those meetings. He was in other meetings. He's like, yeah, like on the other side. However, I also believe there are outside counsel that have never been inside that still get it and still understand questions that need to be asked from a business perspective. And to me, that's just them working to understand it and having, creating relationships and being curious and learning about what it truly is. Like my corporate counsel, they've never been in a business, but they certainly know a lot of the questions to ask when it comes to sort of critical things around a fundraise or critical things around capitalizing the business. These are business questions. They're not necessarily, what does Delaware law say about this? They have to know that too, but it's everywhere. And
that's the foundation though, right? So like you expect your outside counsel to know the law, not because they read, like Law 360 this morning, which is helpful to see where trends are, but they actually went and read the law. Like they know the law.
That would be ideal. Yes.
We joke that sometimes we feel like we're the folks who actually went and read the statute as opposed to the other law firms, white papers. And
it's crazy.
There's a lot of time.
Oh, sorry, Scott. I was going to say, because I want to unpack that point you just made because it's important. It's fascinating to me. I use CCPA. I used to lead on CCPA for the legal department at Salesforce. Yeah. And like, it was fascinating to me to see all the, client alerts, white papers, all that law firm collateral coming out every time the AG in California said something or did something or whatever. And the diversity of thought that would come out of these, like massively different interpretations. I mean, everybody hits the general top points the same, right? But like just massively different interpretations, sometimes ones that just, to your point, revealed something to me that was interesting, which is you didn't read the law, I can tell. Like I sometimes would read a client alert, like, you haven't taken the time to read the regulation, the proposed regulatory language or the law or whatever. Like how does an in-houser like shuffle through all of that to find some truth?
Yeah. Unfortunately, I think you have to have your go-to counsel that's able to unpack it for you. And this goes back to the hourly rates though, Pedro, because that if you've got go-to counsel, that's stuff that is largely being done kind of just as client service, right? It's those phone calls. Hey, I've got this question from operations. We're trying to figure out how to code something. This is how we're reading the statute. Am I reading it right? And that's that first 10-minute conversation. Yeah, you don't get charged for that. But it can't be that, I'm going to Google it and then find some law firm's white paper and say, well, this is what I read, so this is how it works. And I still have clients do that. I mean, I have clients who will put up on the screen now that we're in the Zoom world, hey, I'm reading this article from the National Law Journal that describes this foreign law. And my response is, well, we probably should go read the law.
Good point.
But I think it's hard. I think it's hard to unpack it because there's just a lot of noise.
We're in a space where the law is very new, right? And hasn't been interpreted so much. So you can get a client alert, Pedro, to your point, you can get a client alert from 6 different law firms that has the same gist, but has a different flavor and a different feel because, and 3 of those firms could have legitimate different thought processes or interpretations. Right. There are 3 that might not have read the law so well, but there's an intense amount of variability. So it just goes to all of the intangible reasons that you select an outside counsel to work with. And those are the intangibles that matter so much when the chips are down and when you need something. And that actually leads me to one of the other things I want to talk about with you, Scott, which is ethics. As one of my outside counsel, but you also happen to be my friend first. I tend to go to you, and you as well, Pedro, for the questions that come up outside of the context of work, of the actual work, but the actual sort of, what should I do ethically in this particular scenario, or what are my obligations to, not just to the company or but what are my obligations to myself in terms of what do I expect of myself, as a lawyer and as a business person. So where does that come from for you, Scott? I'm curious. I am always asking you these things, and where do you get that when you need that?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I get it from conversations with you and others that I call on. It sounds a little wishy-washy. There is this moral compass idea that we all walk around with, trying to understand what's right and wrong in our own judgment. Where that comes from for me, I have a hard time. I would have a hard time actually explaining that. You're getting into like the who's Scott Lashway thing. Boy, that gets deep. But I think I think there is guardrails in what we do, especially your point about this area of the law is new, right? And so there are guardrails. There's the third rail, and the third rail is usually easy to identify. One of the things I think we all have a responsibility to do in our field in particular is understand, do I have the ability to figure out the answer to this problem? And do I have the skills? Do I have the experience? Do I have the resources? And this gets to some of the conversations you and I have had, Andy, where, sometimes it's not always right in front of you. And clients these days demand the answers immediately, right? I'm walking into a meeting. There's going to be an important decision made. I don't have time for you to go do a memo. I don't want to pay for a memo. And so some of that just comes down to judgment. We say calling balls and strikes and a bunch of other analogies. But, for me, I've been practicing about 20 years, and some of that comes from that. Some of that comes from long before I was a lawyer.
Is ethics relative? I think it is. I think one of the question is this.
Relative.
Yeah, like, does ethics vary by use case, scenario, and place when we talk about privacy? But we'll keep going, but just interested in your reaction to that question.
Well, yeah, I mean, so we're talking about privacy. I mean, this is something that I usually speak about in private with friends, but we're talking about privacy, and the conversation about privacy in the country, in the US, is largely about data. There are other fundamental privacy discussions in the country that have been going on for far longer than people have been using the internet. And, we all studied those cases in law school, and they get to very personal things. And it is interesting, I was doing some research this morning for a client call later, and it is interesting, the history of privacy in this country. I mean, there are state constitutions that provide fundamental privacy rights, notwithstanding whatever your views are of the US Constitution. And, if you want to get foundational, where does the right to privacy originate in the US? You go back to fundamental rights and freedoms. The Europeans have a strong view on that. The US has a bit of a different view, but some states have very specific constitutional provisions on this issue. And I think that's a very fascinating discussion, and it's a bit of an ethical discussion when looking at someone's privacy rights online. And so, yeah, I think you're right, Peter. That's a long way of me saying that right now, I think it is probably relative. I don't know if it should be, but the use case and the material that you're claiming is private. There are differences.
I think it's also outside of privacy. I can think of one example, Scott, where in a previous situation, I went and bent your ear on a topic, right? And I was like, it was a business issue. It wasn't a privacy issue. And so it was just saying, this is the business issue, and these are the things that I've done. And, your feedback to me was, you've done all you can do. At that point, you're, sort of helping me know where the line where I like, it's okay to stop. Like, what's your responsibility to stop yelling from the rooftops inside of a business? If you don't agree with something, you don't agree with it, and you say it, and you have to put it out there into the world. But like, where does your ethical and your sort of personal obligation begin and end? So even outside of privacy, just in general, there are metes and bounds of that ethical choice, I think.
Yeah.
Sorry, I just want to say one thing because I think it's important. I'm increasingly curious about and concerned with the dominant notion of privacy and how it is almost an absolutist conversation, meaning like when we're talking about privacy, that's all we're talking about, and not doing so in the context of other rights and other issues that may weigh against it or be at tension with it. GDPR and CCPA to me are demonstrations of elitist views on privacy that don't necessarily consider the needs and impact to communities that don't have a voice in the discussion. And some of it is starting to strike me as patriarchal. Like if you're sitting in an Asian country, I can think of two off the top of my head, India and China, just the notion of privacy is different. So the idea that a law like GDPR a regulation like GDPR decides that it's going to have this like global effect, and that's how it was designed, just seems like Europe doing European things that they've done for 1,000 years.
You're not going to.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are parts of. I'm not going to respond to the geopolitical piece, but there are parts of the world that have demonstrated a history to want to project its beliefs, and Europe is certainly one of them. So is the U.S.
As a minority, I
this idea, though.
But you see where I'm coming from, right?
Yeah, it is troubling. It is troubling.
It
is troubling in a big way, and I think you're definitely right, Pedro. That particularly the I don't know if it's intended or unintended, but the consequence of some of these provisions and some of the laws are creating disparity and are creating situations in which businesses are making choices which will end up promoting disparity without the ability to really raise that as a concern and as a problem. Like, well, if I'm under a situation where I have to make my platform paid in order to be able to utilize data, well, what is the impact of that is very negative on people and disparately impactful and wrong. So
yeah, the challenge for me is this.
Not flexible enough.
Yeah, the challenge for me is this, and this has happened before, so this isn't new. The world industrialized 150 years ago, and Western countries especially benefited, became incredibly wealthy, powerful nations, created the military industrial complex that to this day is kind of the largest vessel for power on earth. And now, we say to developing countries, well, now we learned that the environment is impacted, and we learned that, mono agriculture is bad, and whatever. And so you can't do these things now, right? Like now, if you do these things, you don't care about the world, even though we got rich off of doing these very same things. With privacy, I'm starting to see patterns that feel the same. The Western world has benefited greatly from privacy greenfields, right? Like the company I work for is an example, and others, right? Generated tremendous wealth, tremendous social connection, tremendous impact, tremendous scale of communication and community. And now we're creating all these rules. Well, there are entire continents that are just now adopting social media, that are just now adopting like 3G internet, entire continents, right? Full of hundreds of millions and in some cases billions of people. I wonder about fairness in the context of imposing these now rigid in some ways, but definitely structured and expensive regulatory regimes on countries who might be developing their own startup ecosystem, their first incubation culture for online companies. Is it fair to say to an African startup in Johannesburg, well, now you have to abide by all of these expensive rules, where if you would have been, in Silicon Valley in 1999, none of this mattered.
Yeah, man, it's impossible.
Yeah, but one of the
the same groups always
I think
get
one of the things
marginalized. That's the point. That's the point.
But I think you're also getting at a point, Pedro, that we're all paying attention to, which is, I'll see if I can describe it well, but it's, privacy is a bit of a misnomer in how a lot of people use the word. And they're conflating issues. I mean, the easiest example here in the US is every time there's a sizable, data security matter that impacts a large percentage of consumers, or now we've got, the supply chain attacks, everybody starts talking about privacy. That's not a privacy issue, first and foremost. It's a security issue. And, again, going back to your examples, some of those issues aren't privacy issues. They're the deployment of technology, the availability of technology, the power of technology, the desire that individuals and people have to use technology to communicate, both within their small communities and then outside to the outside world. And some of that's not privacy. And we're using privacy in a way to regulate some of that through application of some international or extraterritorial laws, rightfully or wrongfully, but it's actually not getting at what some of the core concerns should be.
I agree. And you create a high operational cost barrier to entry into markets where scale happens, like Europe, California, Virginia. I mean, these are highly dense, highly wealthy, highly populated, highly sophisticated infrastructure societies. And so if you're the small startup in India trying to build out scale, and now you have this not new, but like this really high cost that just wasn't there when your competition, which are incumbents, were scaling, I don't know about fairness there. Right.
We don't have any regulatory history. That's the other challenge here, right? They could scale and start up. What's the regulatory enforcement going to be? Who knows? We don't really.
Well, I mean, think about the development of technology in the healthcare space, right? Even here in the U.S. And one could make a good argument that the pandemic and the impact that's resulted from the healthcare industry needing to focus the provision of services remotely is probably not such a bad thing for a lot of communities that are not as wealthy, right? That don't have the ability to go to the private doctor every day, or even to pay for the private doctor. So maybe healthcare is now delivered cheaply, more efficiently at home. But there's also a good argument that the provision and availability of data and the restrictions that some of these laws could apply or impact that data set is impacting the development of technology, or could impact the development of technology over the coming years. Now, we know there's HIPAA exceptions to some of these, but not all health data is HIPAA data. So, you have those issues right at home here in the U.S. With respect to further technology development that should be impacting communities that are not as well off as others.
These are hard questions.
And then again, that's being done in the privacy. That's being done under this realm of what's private and what's not private, and it's probably not the right conversation.
Yeah, these are interesting, hard questions. I've never been as philosophical as I am about privacy from a perspective of how it affects other areas of life, to your point, as I have been over the last since the pandemic, right? And I really do think us, and I'm part of the elite, by the way. I'm not sitting here acting like I'm one of the privacy Western elites that I'm being critical of, obviously. But some introspection needs to be done about, as we promulgate new laws and as we advance and oppose different types of regulations, considering the effect, not just on marginalized countries, marginalized communities, but just the effects on other rights for all of us, how it impacts our lives, how it raises costs, how it raises barriers for people's access and usage of technology for other goods that maybe aren't as super aligned with privacy. It's just something that I don't hear talked about enough, which is why I talk about it so much on this podcast, because I think it's like super important.
I'm glad you're talking about it. I'm glad you're raising it. I'm glad it's on your mind. That makes me feel good that it's being elevated. It should. It should. I want to before we have to wrap up, I want to ask Scott one more question, if that's okay. You've worked on a lot of data breaches, so cybersecurity, not necessarily privacy issues. I'm just curious, like, what's the most interesting story that you can tell, or that you can sort of describe what that's like when you work on an incident like that that's really large or public or challenging in that way?
I mean, those matters, and I if we were continuing to talk about the topic with Pedro, I think there's some overlap here. Those matters, I think, are benefited by having a set of experiences that goes outside of privacy or security. So, some of those security matters are relatively straightforward in the sense of, here's what happened and we're going to work through the issue because it's known, it's right in front of us. Where I think those matters become kind of more interesting and more problematic is the ones where you can't figure out what's going on. And I've got a white collar investigations and litigation background, so I come at all of this from a risk perspective and have handled literally hundreds of internal investigations for covering a variety of subject matters, including technology and security. And that experience lends itself for me to, try to figure out the puzzle, right? So something's happening and you can't figure out what's happening. That doesn't mean it just goes away. It means you got to keep grinding at it. And, there are a lot of resources you can call to the table. I mean, I think every day there's a new cyber company that's out there that's going to tell us that their technology is going to solve the problem. But at the end of the day, from my view, it all comes down to human judgment. And so the decision making, like going back to where we started the conversation, the small decision making in the room when we're trying to operationalize and mitigate legal risk, that is critical so that when the security risk presents itself, you're prepared. In terms of, most of our work in that space is not public, which I enjoy. So in terms of telling war stories, I'll probably steer clear of that for you. But we've handled matters that, are extremely tricky, where, we've had threat actors, that we nicknamed by letter from A to M. And, it had all the big ones you read about, and it had a whole bunch of the criminal organizations. And you think to yourself, how could they all be in this company system at one time, literally operating on the same day? And if you count out letters A through M, that's a lot. So, those are some of the more complicated ones, ones where we have to take a large company and all of its systems down, take them offline, scrub everything, in the matter of 12 or 24 hours, and then stand the company back up. Those are matters that require a lot of work and a lot of coordination, not just from the team here, but others as well. And there's obviously a lot of privacy issues that intersect with a lot of that work. So,
sticking with data breach, just to follow up on Andy's question, are you surprised that, there's been some catastrophic data breaches in the sense of like data loss, and there's lockout attacks and all kinds of things. But are you surprised that no major Fortune 500 company has just been taken down? Just operationally incapacitated by a breach? I don't know of an example where that's happened meaningfully, meaning like for a prolonged period of time.
Am I surprised? No. But is it something we all worry about? Yes. I think there are there are examples that are public where companies have suffered major attacks and have had pretty significant operational losses. There was a company that's supporting a lot of the U.S. internet traffic that was taken down a couple of years ago, and no one had ever heard of the company before until they were taken down. And then everyone said, "Oh, wow, I didn't realize that they were operating out of New England. They were a focal point of major internet traffic in the U.S."
I worked there.
Yeah.
Well, so this is public, right? But like, couldn't we trace? I don't know if you want to call it like a failure, but like, couldn't we trace the path to the end of Yahoo that way, in some way? Massive data breach. I mean, Yahoo was already facing like a lot of business challenges when they had that massive data breach, but it must be that exacerbated the kind of end of Yahoo.
I query whether consumers respond to data breaches. And I legitimately mean I query that. I haven't seen evidence one way or another. I actually haven't seen evidence, and someone watching this or listening to it may say otherwise, where the market actually responds to data breaches. We see stock prices go down, but they go back up. And, the idea there is that security risks or privacy risks are embedded in the market price. And on the other hand, in private transactions, we see transaction value change. And, we've been part of deals where they've changed significantly in a material way because of privacy and security risks. Listen, I mean, going back to my comment about how long people have been doing this, I've been doing this for about 20 years in privacy and security. And, people have said, oh, a lot of things have changed. A lot of things haven't changed too. The laws have changed, especially on the privacy side. That's changed pretty significantly. On the security side, people have been stealing things forever, right? And so, the vectors have changed, but, I tell if I'm in front of a board, I make a joke about, you used to need 3 things to rob a bank. You need a mask, a gun, and a getaway plan. And now you can make yourself a latte and steal millions or more from your couch. And that's all that's changed.
I think that's right. And shout out to Yahoo for still sort of being around in a lot of ways. I mean, but just differently than we expected, I think, back in the 90s. But Yahoo's still kicking.
We'll end with a shout out to Yahoo.
Shout out to Yahoo, man.
That's as good enough as any end. Scott, thanks for dialing in. Thanks for talking with us, and the wide-ranging conversation. So really fun to chat with you today, and back to the grind.
Let's go do it.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Thanks,
I'm going to bill you all 0.8 for this, just so you know. 0.8. All right, so coming your way.
Don't hesitate.
Yeah.
All right.
Bill Andy.
Nice seeing you guys.
Thanks.
Later. That was funny, man. That was good.
All right, we're good, Scott. You can drop off.
Thanks, Scott.
Okay. Thanks, guys. I appreciate the chance. It was fun to talk to you both.
Thanks,
awesome, man.
Talk to you later.
Hey, Andy, I see that we're still recording. Maybe you guys are going to keep doing this, but do you want me to reach out to that person for the 18th that you talked about?
For the
I
what?
didn't reach out to him. For the 18th. I didn't reach out to Cam. Do you want me to reach out to him?
Yeah, will you?
Yeah, I will. And see if you can do the 9:30 slot.
Yeah, that'd be awesome.
Okay. I'll see if he's free to join.
Okay, thanks.
All right.
All right.
See you guys. See you, Pedro.